The lights of Dallas glittered in the distance, the towering skyline standing as a stark contrast to the dark, quiet neighborhood below. Emma Davis sat in the dimly lit living room of her suburban home, her fingers nervously tapping on the edge of her wine glass. Her eyes darted toward the clock, its ticking the only sound breaking the stillness. Midnight. He's late again, she muttered, her voice barely audible. The seed of suspicion that had been quietly growing inside her now bloomed into full-fledged paranoia. Alex had been working late for weeks, offering vague excuses about client meetings and paperwork. But Emma wasn't buying it anymore. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the call log. Her eyes scanned the list of missed calls and unanswered texts. Something wasn't right. He wasn't the man she had married, not anymore. A sudden buzz from her phone startled her. It was a message from Sarah. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Coffee at the usual place." Emma's heart raced. She knew Sarah had always been more cautious, more rational, but even Sarah had started to notice something strange about Alex. Tomorrow was the day she would set her plan in motion. She had asked Sarah for something big. Too big, maybe. But she had to know the truth, even if it hurt. Could Alex be trusted, or was her whole life built on a lie? As Emma drained the last of her wine, the door creaked open behind her. Alex stepped in, his shirt slightly wrinkled, his eyes avoiding hers. "Late again," Emma said, her voice steady but sharp. She watched him closely, trying to decipher the mystery in his movements. Alex sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sorry, long day at the office." Emma smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Right. Of course." She let the words hang in the air, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. As Alex retreated upstairs, Emma's grip on her phone tightened. Tomorrow, everything would change. The bustling sounds of the Dallas coffee shop provided a stark contrast to the tension that simmered between Emma and Sarah. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, but neither woman seemed to notice. Emma sat across from Sarah, her eyes fixed, unblinking, as Sarah nervously stirred her latte. "I don't like this, Emma," Sarah said finally, her voice hushed, but firm. "What if this goes wrong? What if—" "I need to know," Emma cut in, her voice hard and unwavering. "I can't live like this anymore. If he's lying to me, I deserve to know. You're my best friend. You said you'd help me." Sarah looked down at her cup, unsure. This was no longer just a test. It was a game she didn't want to play. But Emma's desperation was palpable. She was sinking in doubt, and Sarah knew if she didn't help, it might destroy her friend even more. "Okay," Sarah finally agreed, her words slow and hesitant. "I'll do it, but only once. After that, you need to let this go, Emma. Whatever happens, you have to accept it." Emma nodded, her relief washing over her like a wave. She reached across the table, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Thank you. I promise, after this it's done." The plan was simple. That evening, Sarah would accidentally run into Alex at the bar he frequented after work, the Slate, an upscale bar in uptown Dallas. It was the perfect place, far enough from their usual spots, where Alex wouldn't expect a thing. She would flirt with him, see how far he'd let things go, and report back to Emma. Hours later, the bar was buzzing with life, filled with the after-work crowd looking to wind down from the day's stress. Sarah stood at the entrance, her heart racing. She spotted Alex immediately, sitting at the bar, sipping a drink, oblivious to what was coming. Taking a deep breath, Sarah walked over, flashing a friendly smile. "Alex," she said, feigning surprise. "What are you doing here?" Alex looked up, momentarily caught off guard, then smiled warmly. "Sarah, hey. I didn't expect to see you here." They made small talk, Sarah's heart pounding with every word. She leaned in, pretending to be more interested than she was. It felt wrong. Everything about this felt wrong, but she was committed now. She had to go through with it, for Emma. As the conversation unfolded, Sarah watched closely, waiting for any sign, any crack in Alex's defenses. But he remained polite, engaging, and professional. He didn't flirt back, didn't take the bait. In fact, he seemed almost uncomfortable with her advances. Then, as she excused herself to head to the restroom, her phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen. one that made her blood run cold. You've gone too far. Stop now before it's too late. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She scanned the bar, her eyes darting from face to face, but no one seemed to be paying attention to her. Who had sent the message? And how did they know what was happening? Heart racing, Sarah quickly left the bar without saying goodbye to Alex, her mind reeling with fear. As she stepped outside into the cool Dallas night, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Back in her car, she texted Emma. He didn't take the bait, but something's not right. Someone knows what we're doing. I got a message. We need to talk. Now. Emma's response was swift, but dismissive. You're being paranoid, Sarah. It's just a prank. Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow. Sarah sat there, staring at her phone, a deep sense of unease settling in her chest. Something was very wrong, but she had no idea just how dangerous the game they had started was about to become. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of dread gnawing at her. The message from the previous night still lingered in her mind, and the uneasy feeling hadn't left her. She couldn't shake the thought that someone knew what they were up to. Trying to push away the anxiety, she dressed quickly and decided to confront Emma in person. Emma's house felt eerily quiet when Sarah arrived. The sun streamed in through the windows, but it did nothing to lift the tension in the air. Sarah found Emma in the kitchen, sipping her coffee casually, as if the events of the night before hadn't happened at all. You're here early, Emma said with a raised eyebrow, barely looking up from her mug. We need to talk, Emma. Now, Sarah demanded, her voice sharp. That message I got, it wasn't a prank. Someone knows. I don't know how, but I feel like I'm being watched. Emma sighed, finally setting her coffee down. You're overreacting, Sarah. I told you. It's probably just some random person messing with you. You need to relax. No, you're not listening. Sarah shot back, her frustration boiling over. I don't feel safe. This isn't just about Alex anymore. Something's wrong. I've been getting strange calls too, and I swear someone's following me. Emma stared at her for a moment, the calmness in her eyes slowly fading as Sarah's panic began to seep in. Still, she refused to give in. Look, Emma said, her voice lowering. This whole thing with Alex, it's getting to you. You're just imagining things. I know this has been stressful, but it's all in your head. But Sarah wasn't convinced. She had seen the message with her own eyes. Someone knew, and Emma's dismissal only made her feel more isolated. I'm done, Emma. I'm out, Sarah said firmly. I don't care about your test anymore. This has gone too far. If you don't stop this, I'm going to Alex myself and tell him everything. Emma's face darkened, the fear of exposure flickering across her features. For a moment, the two friends stared at each other in tense silence. Emma's paranoia was written across her face, but Sarah's fear was something deeper, something more primal. Without another word, Sarah turned and stormed out of the house, her heart racing as she got into her car. The streets of Dallas seemed strangely empty as she drove, her mind racing with what to do next. She felt suffocated by Emma's obsession, and now, it wasn't just her loyalty being tested. Her safety was at risk. As she drove, the uneasy feeling that had plagued her for days began to creep back. Every car she passed felt like it was following her. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, darker, more menacing. Sarah glanced into her rearview mirror, her breath catching in her throat. Was that car behind her following too closely? She shook her head, trying to focus. It's just your imagination, she muttered to herself. But the feeling wouldn't go away. She reached for her phone, dialing Emma one more time, determined to put an end to this madness. The line rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Frustrated, she hung up and pulled over at a quiet spot on the side of the road, just outside the city. She needed a moment to collect her thoughts, to figure out what to do next. But as she sat there in her car, staring at the road ahead, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure, standing far in the distance, watching her from behind a row of trees. Her breath quickened. Who was it? Was it the same person who had sent the message? She reached for her phone, ready to call the police. But before she could dial, the figure disappeared. She blinked, her heart pounding, unsure if she had really seen someone or if her mind was playing tricks on her again. Panicking, She turned the key in the ignition and sped off, her hands trembling on the wheel. Whoever was watching her was real. This wasn't her imagination. She needed help, but who could she trust? Emma had become consumed by her obsession with Alex, and now Sarah feared she was in too deep. As she raced back towards the city, her phone buzzed again. She hesitated before glancing at the screen. You should have listened. It's too late now. The message was from an unknown number. Cold fear gripped her heart. Her foot pressed harder on the gas, desperate to get away from whatever, or whoever, was out there. But in her panic, she didn't see the black SUV creeping up from the side street. The screech of tires and the blinding headlights filled her vision as it slammed into her car. Everything went dark. Back at her home, Emma stared at her phone, rereading the last message Sarah had sent her. She had brushed off Sarah's concerns, convinced it was all in her head. Now, there was only silence. No messages. No calls. She glanced out the window, a knot forming in her stomach. Something wasn't right. The sound of Emma's phone ringing jolted her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, recognizing the number, Detective Mark Thompson. Her heart raced as she hesitated before answering. Mrs. Davis? The detective's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, one that immediately set Emma on high alert. We need you to come down to the station. It's about your friend, Sarah Miller. Emma's stomach dropped. She tried to push down the rising panic, but her voice came out shaky. What happened? There's been an accident. Sarah's car was found crashed on the outskirts of town. We need to ask you a few questions. An icy wave of dread washed over her. She could barely speak as she muttered, I'll be there right away. She hung up and stood frozen for a moment, her mind struggling to process the news. Sarah, the woman who had been her best friend, her confidant, was now involved in something much darker than Emma had anticipated. As she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, her thoughts spun in a frantic loop. What kind of accident? Was Sarah okay? The drive to the station was a blur, the city lights of Dallas flickering past her, a stark contrast to the darkness that had settled in her chest. When she arrived at the police station, Detective Thompson met her in the lobby. His expression was serious, but there was a softness in his eyes. Mrs. Davis, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Sarah Miller didn't survive the accident. The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. Her breath caught in her throat as a wave of nausea rolled over her. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice cracking. It was just a car accident, right? Detective Thompson shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at the folder in his hands. That's what we thought at first, but something doesn't add up. The crash was no ordinary accident. Someone tampered with her car. The brake lines were cut. Emma's knees buckled, and she slumped into the nearest chair. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Sarah was dead, murdered, and Emma had dragged her into this nightmare. We're investigating all possible leads, the detective continued, but we need to know. Do you have any idea who might have wanted to harm her? Emma's mind raced. The anonymous messages, the calls Sarah had received, the warnings she had brushed off. It had all been real. Someone had been following Sarah, and now she was dead because of it. I don't know, Emma stammered, her voice barely audible. She was helping me with something, a personal issue. But this wasn't supposed to happen. It was just a stupid test. I never thought it would go this far. Detective Thompson leaned in, his tone sharpening. What kind of test? Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she hesitated, debating whether to come clean. She realized there was no turning back now. She had to tell him everything. I thought my husband was cheating on me, she admitted, her voice trembling. I asked Sarah to flirt with him, see if he'd take the bait. I didn't think it would go this far, but then she started getting strange messages. Someone was watching her. The detective's eyes narrowed. And you didn't think to report this? I didn't think it was serious. Emma cried, her voice breaking. I thought it was just someone playing a sick joke. But now she's dead because of me. Detective Thompson took a deep breath, processing what Emma had told him. There's more going on here than just a test of loyalty, Mrs. Davis. Sarah was killed deliberately, and if what you're saying is true, you and your husband may be in danger too. Emma's mind reeled. Danger? How could this be happening? Her plan was supposed to be harmless, a way to settle her own insecurities. But now it had spiraled out of control, and the consequences were deadly. We're looking into Sarah's phone records and security footage from the area where the accident happened. The detective continued. But I need you to think, Mrs. Davis. Was there anyone who might have had a motive? Anything that seemed out of place? Emma's thoughts flashed back to the conversations she'd had with Sarah, to the feeling of being watched, the anonymous messages warning them to stop. And then, something clicked. She remembered Sarah mentioning that one of Alex's clients had been acting strange, a powerful businessman named Roger Lancaster, who had been involved in a lawsuit Alex was handling. Sarah had confided in Emma a few weeks ago, saying that she'd done some digging of her own. She'd uncovered something she never had the chance to share. I think, Emma's voice trembled, I think Sarah found out something about one of Alex's clients, Roger Lancaster. He's rich, powerful, and dangerous. Sarah said something didn't feel right about him, but she didn't get a chance to tell me the details. The detective nodded slowly, jotting down the name. We'll look into him. In the meantime, I suggest you and your husband stay somewhere safe. If Lancaster is involved, this may be far from over. Emma nodded, numb with shock as she stood up to leave. The weight of guilt pressed down on her, heavier than ever. She had started this. Her paranoia had set everything in motion, and now Sarah was dead. And worse still, the real threat was only just beginning to reveal itself. As she walked out of the police station into the cold Dallas night, Emma felt a shadow of dread settle over her. She wasn't just losing her grip on her marriage. She was losing control of her entire life. And the deadly game she had started was far from finished. The drive home was a blur. Emma's thoughts spiraled into a vortex of fear, guilt, and panic. Sarah was dead, and it was her fault. The weight of that reality crushed her chest, making it hard to breathe. And now, Detective Thompson's words echoed in her mind. You may be in danger too. As she pulled into the driveway, the dark shadow of her house loomed before her, its familiar warmth replaced by a cold, suffocating emptiness. Alex was inside, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them both. Emma hesitated before stepping out of the car, her hand trembling as she turned off the engine. Once inside, Alex was at the dining table, sorting through some papers. He looked up as she walked in, his expression softening when he saw her. Hey, everything okay? He asked, his voice calm and oblivious to the chaos Emma was carrying inside. Emma stared at him for a long moment, the guilt tightening around her throat. How could she explain what had happened? How could she tell him that her paranoia, her obsessive need to test him, had led to Sarah's death? We need to talk, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. She walked over and sat across from him, her hands clasped together tightly. It's about Sarah. Alex frowned, sensing the seriousness in her tone. What about Sarah? She's dead, Emma blurted out, the words slipping out before she could control them. She died last night in a car accident. But it wasn't an accident, Alex. Someone killed her. Alex froze, the color draining from his face. What? What are you talking about? How did this happen? Emma's eyes filled with tears as she recounted everything. Her suspicion, the loyalty test, Sarah's involvement, and the terrifying spiral that followed. She told him about the strange messages, the threats, and how Sarah had been trying to dig into one of his clients, Roger Lancaster. Alex's shock quickly turned to anger as she confessed to hiring Sarah to test his loyalty. You thought I was cheating on you? His voice was a mix of hurt and fury. You dragged Sarah into this because of your jealousy? I didn't know it would go this far, Emma sobbed, her face buried in her hands. I never imagined she'd end up dead because of it. I'm sorry, Alex. I'm so sorry. Alex stood up, pacing the room as he processed everything. This is insane, Emma. You didn't trust me, and now someone's dead. And Roger Lancaster? You think he's involved? Emma wiped her eyes, trying to steady her voice. Sarah found something on him. I don't know what, but she said he was dangerous. Detective Thompson is looking into it. Alex paused, his face pale as he realized the severity of the situation. Roger Lancaster. He's a client, but he's always been private. He's powerful, well-connected. If he's involved in something illegal, and Sarah found out, then we're in way over our heads. Just then, Alex's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and froze. The text on his screen read, "You're next? Drop the case, or face the consequences." Alex turned the screen toward Emma, his face now a mirror of her fear. "It's him, isn't it?" he whispered. "Lancaster's behind all of this." Emma felt the icy grip of terror wrap around her again. The game had turned deadly, and now it wasn't just about Sarah's death. It was about survival. Alex was involved now, and the threat had shifted directly to them. "We need to go to the police," Emma said, standing up and grabbing her coat. "We can't stay here. We're not safe." Alex nodded, his expression grim. "You're right. We have to get out of here." As they rushed to pack a few things, every sound in the house seemed amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the rustling of papers. It all felt like an impending threat lurking just outside their door. The tension was unbearable. Suddenly, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. Emma gasped and spun around just in time to see the window near the back of the house explode inward. A shadowy figure moved in the darkness outside. Alex grabbed her by the arm, pulling her into the hallway. "Get down!" he hissed, shoving her behind the kitchen counter as they crouched, hearts racing. The sound of footsteps on broken glass sent a chill down Emma's spine. Someone was in the house. The danger wasn't just an anonymous message anymore. It was real, and it was here. Alex motioned toward the back door, gesturing for Emma to follow him quietly. They crept toward the exit, the tension between them palpable. Emma's breath came in short, shallow bursts as fear coursed through her veins. Just as they reached the door, a voice pierced the silence. "Going somewhere?" Emma froze, her blood running cold. The figure stepped out of the shadows, and she finally saw him clearly. Roger Lancaster, his eyes cold and calculating. He smiled, a predator toying with his prey. "You should have left things alone," Lancaster said, his voice eerily calm. "But now it's too late. You've meddled in things you don't understand." Alex stepped forward, his fists clenched. "What do you want?" Lancaster chuckled darkly. "It's not about what I want. It's about cleaning up loose ends. Sarah got too close, and now, so have you." Before Emma could react, Lancaster pulled a gun from his coat, aiming it directly at Alex. Her heart stopped. Time seemed to slow as she watched in horror, powerless to stop the nightmare unfolding before her. Just as Lancaster was about to pull the trigger, the sound of sirens filled the air, flashing blue and red lights illuminating the night outside. Lancaster's cold expression faltered, and he took a step back. "Next time," he hissed, disappearing into the shadows just as the police stormed the house. Emma collapsed against Alex, sobbing uncontrollably as the officers secured the scene. They were safe, for now, but the danger wasn't over. Lancaster had escaped, and they both knew he wouldn't stop until he'd finished what he started. As they were led out to safety, Emma glanced back at their shattered home, knowing that life would never be the same. The price of her suspicion, her test, had been far greater than she ever could have imagined. And the game Lancaster had started wasn't finished. Not yet. The following days passed in a haze of fear and uncertainty. The police had taken Emma and Alex into protective custody, relocating them to a safe house on the outskirts of Dallas while they searched for Roger Lancaster. The detective's words echoed in Emma's mind. This may be far from over. The safe house was a modest, nondescript place hidden away from prying eyes, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards made her jump. Alex was quieter than usual, his mind clearly focused on the looming threat. The guilt between them lingered unspoken but palpable. Detective Thompson visited regularly, updating them on the investigation. Each time he arrived without news of Lancaster's capture, Emma's anxiety deepened. "It's only a matter of time before we get him," Thompson assured them during one visit, though the doubt in his eyes betrayed his confidence. "We've got teams combing through his known properties, but he's slippery. He's been operating in the shadows for years." Emma's mind raced as she sat at the small kitchen table, Alex next to her. The realization that Lancaster was still out there, watching, waiting, made her stomach twist in knots. "I'm so sorry, Alex," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, unable to keep the weight of her guilt bottled up any longer. I never should have doubted you. If I hadn't started this, none of this would have happened. Sarah would still be alive. Alex sighed, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He hadn't spoken much since the night Lancaster had broken into their home. His anger had cooled, but there was a distance between them that hadn't existed before. We can't change what's happened, he replied, his voice low and resigned. What matters now is stopping Lancaster. We need to stay focused. Emma nodded, though her heart ached. She knew things would never be the same between them. The damage was done, and they were both haunted by the choices that had led them here. That night, Emma found herself unable to sleep. The safe house was quiet, almost too quiet, and the oppressive darkness outside made her feel suffocated. She tossed and turned in bed, her mind replaying the events that had spiraled out of control. Then, in the dead of night, a sound broke the silence, a faint noise, like something moving outside the house. Emma shot up, her heart pounding. She held her breath, straining to listen. The noise came again, louder this time. Footsteps. Someone was outside. She nudged Alex awake, her voice a frantic whisper. Alex, wake up. I think someone's here. Alex immediately sat up, fully alert. His eyes darted toward the door, his body tense with fear. Stay quiet, he whispered, grabbing the small kitchen knife they'd been keeping by the bedside for protection. I'll check it out. Emma's pulse raced as she followed Alex into the living room. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist as they moved through the house, every step filled with dread. She reached for her phone, ready to call Detective Thompson, but as she fumbled with the screen, the front door creaked open slightly. Alex froze, holding the knife at the ready. Emma's breath caught in her throat. A figure stepped through the door, shrouded in darkness. Who's there? Alex demanded, his voice barely concealing his fear. The figure moved closer, stepping into the faint light that trickled through the curtains. Emma's heart nearly stopped when she recognized the man's face. Detective Thompson. Emma exhaled shakily, the tension in her body releasing slightly. Detective, what are you doing here? She asked, confused by his sudden appearance in the middle of the night. Thompson looked uneasy, his eyes darting around the room. I came to warn you. We just received intel. Lancaster might be planning to make his move tonight. Emma's blood ran cold. What do you mean? We intercepted a call. He knows where you are. I had to come myself, Thompson said, his voice low. We don't have much time. Alex lowered the knife, his face pale. So what do? We have to get you out of here now, Thompson said, already moving toward the door. I've got a team nearby. I'll take you somewhere safe until we catch him. Emma's instincts screamed that something was wrong. Why hadn't Thompson called first? Why would he come alone in the middle of the night? Her hand trembled as she grabbed Alex's arm, pulling him back slightly. Wait, she whispered, her eyes narrowing at Thompson. Why didn't you bring backup? Why didn't you call before coming here? Thompson's gaze flickered, just for a moment, and in that split second, Emma knew. Her heart pounded as realization hit her like a freight train. This wasn't Detective Thompson. It was Lancaster. She grabbed Alex's arm, yanking him backward just as Lancaster lunged forward, pulling a gun from beneath his jacket. You're too clever for your own good, Lancaster snarled, his cold, predatory eyes locking onto Emma. Alex shoved Emma behind him, standing between her and the danger, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. What do you want, Lancaster? Alex asked, his voice shaking with barely controlled fear. Lancaster sneered. I told you. I'm tying up loose ends. You and your wife have caused me a lot of trouble, but now, I'm here to finish it. Emma's mind raced. She frantically searched for something, anything, that could help them escape. The knife in Alex's hand felt pitifully small against the gun Lancaster held, but it was their only weapon. Please, Emma begged, her voice trembling. We won't say anything. We'll disappear. Just let us go. Lancaster laughed coldly. It's too late for that. Just as he raised the gun, a deafening crash shattered the air. The front door flew open, and a team of police officers swarmed into the house, weapons drawn. Freeze. Drop the gun. One of the officers shouted, his flashlight blinding Lancaster. For a moment, Lancaster hesitated, his eyes darting between the officers and Emma. Then, with a furious growl, he raised the gun toward her. But before he could fire, the officers opened fire, bullets ripping through the air. Lancaster crumpled to the ground, his gun clattering to the floor as blood pooled beneath him. Emma collapsed against Alex, trembling, as the police secured the scene. It was over. Lancaster was dead. The nightmare that had consumed their lives for weeks had finally come to an end. But as Emma looked at Alex, she knew that this was not the end of their struggle. Their marriage, their trust. It was shattered, just like the remnants of their safe house. The price of paranoia had been too high, and though Lancaster was gone, the scars he'd left behind would remain forever. The real challenge was just beginning. The days following Roger Lancaster's death passed in a blur of police debriefings and legal proceedings. Emma and Alex were temporarily relocated to a safe apartment in a quieter part of Dallas, but even in the supposed safety of their new surroundings, the weight of everything that had transpired pressed heavily on both of them. The media frenzy surrounding the case had died down, but whispers still lingered. The public saw the headlines. Prominent businessman involved in murder plot ends in tragic shootout. What the news didn't cover, though, was the emotional devastation left in the wake of Lancaster's crimes. Emma sat at the small kitchen table of their new place, staring blankly at the newspaper spread before her. The headline about Lancaster's death felt distant, almost unreal, like something that had happened to someone else. Her fingers idly traced the edge of the paper as she tried to gather her thoughts. Alex entered the room, looking as weary and broken as Emma felt. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. The silence between them was deafening, thick with all the things they hadn't said to each other since that night. Finally, Emma broke the quiet, her voice small. "I don't know how we got here, Alex. How everything went so wrong." Alex looked down at his coffee, his jaw clenched, before finally responding. "We got here because you didn't trust me, Emma. Because you let your paranoia destroy everything." His words stung, but Emma knew they were true. Her doubts about Alex had set the whole tragedy in motion. She had let her insecurities fester, dragging Sarah into her twisted plan, and now Sarah was dead. The guilt weighed heavily on her chest. "I know," Emma whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I never thought it would go this far. I never thought." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Alex sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "What's done is done. We can't change it. But now, what happens to us?" Emma's heart sank. This was the question that had been gnawing at her for days. What happens next? Could their marriage survive the trauma, the betrayal, the guilt? Or had the events of the last few weeks left them too broken to ever be whole again? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if we can come back from this." Alex nodded slowly, his eyes dark with the same uncertainty. "We've both been through hell, Emma. This wasn't just about you not trusting me. It's about how everything spiraled out of control. Lancaster, the lies, the secrets. I don't know how to move forward." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their shared pain hanging between them like a thick fog. The trust they had once shared seemed so distant now, almost unreachable. The laughter, the love, the easy connection they had enjoyed before. It was buried beneath the wreckage of the choices they'd made. But then, for the first time in what felt like ages, Emma reached out. She placed her hand gently on Alex's, her touch hesitant but filled with a quiet plea for something. Anything that could heal the chasm between them. "We can try," she said softly, her voice filled with vulnerability. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same, but maybe we can try to pick up the pieces." Alex looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. He didn't pull his hand away. For a moment, there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. "We'll have to rebuild everything," Alex said quietly. "It won't be easy. We'll have to face what happened. Really face it. No more secrets. No more games." Emma nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No more games," she echoed. There was a long pause, as they both sat with the enormity of what lay ahead of them. They were not the same people they had been before all of this. The events that had unfolded, the lies, the betrayal, the death of Sarah, had scarred them both deeply. But for the first time, Emma felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could begin to heal. "We'll go to counseling," Alex said, his voice steadying as he spoke the words aloud. "We'll talk through everything. It's the only way we'll have a chance." Emma nodded again, grateful that Alex was willing to try. She had feared that he would leave her, that the weight of what she had done would be too much for him to bear. But now, as they sat together in their small, quiet kitchen, there was at least a thread of possibility. The silence between them softened, no longer the suffocating wall it had been for so long. It was still fragile. Everything between them was, but it wasn't impossible. Outside, the sun had begun to rise, casting a soft glow through the windows of their temporary home. The light felt like a small reminder that even after the darkest night, the world continued to turn, offering the chance of a new day, a new beginning. Emma glanced at Alex, her heart aching with the knowledge of how much had been lost. But maybe, just maybe, there was still something to be salvaged. They sat together in the dawning light, their hands still connected, as they faced the uncertain future ahead of them. The scars of the past would remain, but perhaps, in time, those scars could heal. And as Emma looked at the man she had nearly lost, she made a silent promise to herself. No more lies. No more doubt. I will rebuild this, one fragile piece at a time. It wasn't an end. It was a beginning. But only time would tell if they could truly survive the storm.